first thing you have to think about if you're a publisher trying to come up with a content idea is, what is the goal? What does the advertiser actually want to accomplish? Because in some cases it's awareness, in other cases it's engagement, and sometimes it's conversion. Sometimes it's something completely different and they're trying to get, earned media coverage. So knowing that up front really gives you a good place to start. If you know that, you know the kinds of content you should be trying to create and trying to come up with. The biggest problem you can have is to create a fantastic piece of content that doesn't accomplish your advertiser's goal. So knowing the objective right up front is very important. To me, native advertising is any form of advertising that organically fits into the environment and the context where it's presented. And I think what's amazing about that is it's different for every single publisher. So if you're a content creator at the New York Times, then what's native for you is in-depth, fact-based reporting. If you're a content creator at BuzzFeed, then what's native for you is socially optimized, very visual, humorous content. If you're Spotify or Pandora, then what's native for you is a sponsored playlist. And so I really find it exciting to think about all those different opportunities and figure out what is native for this context. I think it's a great creative challenge and it gives us something to work on for sure. Finding out what your consumers are actually interested in has never been easier. With all the technology and the data that we have digitally, you can really find the answers to that in so many different places. So you can look to your social channels to see what are people sharing and liking most often. They're probably saying right in the comments what they're actually curious about, what they want to know more about, or what they're sick of hearing about. You can also look to things like your website data to find out what pages or sections or topics they're looking at. Look to your frequently asked questions to see, what challenges they may still have. And even just look to Google for autocomplete. Start typing in some basic facts about your product and see what questions people have. That can be a really great insight for you to know, where those gaps are in their knowledge that you can create content to help fill. There's always a fine line between just enough branding and too much branding, and the tough thing is that there's really no clear answer on when it's one or the other. We know what feels good and what doesn't, what seems comfortable and what seems like over the top, but there's no hard line that says, if the logo is over 22 pixels, that's too much. We don't have those same constraints that you have with typical digital ad placements. So it's definitely a judgment call, and I think everyone's judgment is different. And so because the environments where this content is living are so diverse. Every publisher's website looks different. Then what looks overkill in one environment might barely, tip your radar in the other environment. So it really is a judgment call, and I think we're in the lucky, if not maybe a little unfortunate position that, it's a two-way conversation with our readers now. So they will certainly let you know when it's too much, when you've gone too far, and that's a good signal that you should start scaling back or thinking of other ways. I think on the other end of the spectrum, you want to make sure that branding is also clear, because the last thing you want to do is trick anyone or deceive anyone. And what good does a native ad do for a brand if their branding's not clear and present? So you really do have to try to find that sweet spot and experiment and ask those important questions about whether it's coming through clearly or not. Advertisers are really comfortable talking about themselves. That's what they're used to doing in all of their standard placements and on billboards and in magazines. But they're not so comfortable telling stories in many cases. And so they rely on us on the publishing side to help them figure out what those stories are. I think the easiest way to get an advertiser on board with telling a story is to find a story that inspires them, find a story that touches their heart in the way that they know it will touch their consumer's heart. What's scary about the storytelling is that it's not familiar. And so the more you can familiarize them with the concept of storytelling, help them see the stories that are within their own walls, the more comfortable they'll become. And the more they do that, the more comfortable they'll become with less branded stories, because they'll start to see the value of the story itself and not just the value of a story that achieves an advertising goal. It's so important to start with the story and then figure out what format is the best way to tell it. A lot of times we end up in a brainstorm where you say, okay, we need 3 video ideas. And what you end up with is videos that aren't very exciting because you're forcing something into a format where it doesn't belong. So the best thing to do is just to start by figuring out what that story is. What are we actually going to talk about? How are we going to entertain our consumers? How are we going to help them? What are we going to teach them? And then ask yourself, what's the best way to accomplish that? Is it through video, or is it through an infographic? Or, is it through VR? Is it, an interactive sort of experience? Is it something else entirely, like a course or a movie? There could be a lot of different answers to that question. But if you start with the format and then try to force a story into it, a lot of times that's clear to your consumers. And if it's clear to your consumers, they're not going to engage with it in the way that your advertiser's hoping. One of the big challenges when you're trying to come up with the biggest, best content idea that will impress your advertiser and win the business is the realization that you don't maybe have the budget or the time to create this wonderful, magnificent thing that you've come up with. And that's really disheartening, particularly for a creative first or a creative heavy team, to realize that your big idea may not fit within your constraints. So important to think about different ways that you can scale that idea back or scale other parts of your media plan back to still accomplish the biggest and best idea you can within the time and the budget that you have. Another big challenge that comes up when you're brainstorming native ideas is the reality of the legal situation. There are different laws in every country that pertain to, can you mention a copyrighted brand? Can you name drop a celebrity who may or may not have used your product? Can you talk about a certain landmark that you might not even know is trademarked? Can you have a certain building in the background? A lot of different rules that apply. So it's really important to have an open dialogue with your legal team and the legal team of the brand as well, to make sure that all these ideas are actually feasible and not going to get you in hot water with the various governing bodies in your area. No one wants content that has to be taken down for breaking some sort of legal rule. So very important to think about those things up front and have a gut check, especially early on, especially if you're new to native advertising, either the advertiser or the publisher, and you're just starting out. Ask these kinds of questions and sit down with your legal team. Make them a part of your process so that you can understand going forward and really work together as a team. It shouldn't be this sort of veto power where they come in at the last minute and squash your dreams. That's not what they want to do, and that's not what you want to happen. So the more you can work together with them, the more you can integrate their thinking and their concerns into your process and make sure that it never gets to that point where you have to have something taken down or shot down. So if you've come up with this great idea and then your budget gets slashed and you're being asked to come up with the same level of creativity, that's certainly a challenge. And I think sometimes the best thing to do is not to start over, but to think of, well, what's the 1/3 price version of this? And so if you had pitched, a 4-part video series, well, maybe it's only one video now, and you could still tell a really compelling story with one video. Or you pitch this interactive data visualization, well, maybe now it's just an infographic, but you could still make a really great infographic. I think as creators, it's really hard to let go of the ideal thing that we came up with and create what we see as a lesser version of the initial idea. But it's important to note that our audience doesn't know what the initial budget was, and our audience doesn't care what the initial budget was. Our audience is just looking for quality content that helps them in some way or is of some use to them. So as long as you could still create that, you're still going to be okay. So you just have to put those creative instincts to be disappointed on hold and really think about what you can still deliver to your audience. Many times when we create these campaigns, it's disappointing to think that after a month or 3 weeks or whatever the case may be, that it will just come to an end and perhaps be taken off the website, as is the policy for some publishers. So there's a lot of other ways that you can still give that content life after the campaign is over. It might mean putting more distribution budget, maybe some more social promotion, at a later date when something comes up in the news and makes it relevant again. It could also mean putting it on the brand's website. So at the New York Times T-Brand Studio, when I was there, several times we had advertisers who would ask for permission once the campaign had ended to house the content on their own site. So an example would be Cole Haan. We created a piece called Grit and Grace, which was about the New York City Ballet. And once the campaign was over, they took the videos from that interactive storytelling page that we created, and they actually repurposed the videos to house them on their website so you could view that content there. And it had a whole new life to it. Goldman Sachs did a similar thing with T-Brand Studio, where we created an interactive guide to the capital markets and how all of that works. Very complicated issue that the average person doesn't understand or perhaps isn't interested in understanding, right? But for the Goldman Sachs audience, that's information they need to know. And so it was really valuable for them to put that in a tab on their website where their employees, as well as their customers, could go there and learn more. And that was very in line with what Goldman Sachs was doing on their website already. So it made perfect sense to give that content a second life on the brand's own site. I think our instinct is to kind of go toward the usual ways of getting traffic to our content. So we think about native units on the site or display ads. We probably are running some sort of promotion on social media, but there are a lot of other options that may make sense for the campaign too. So thinking about what email lists and newsletters may be at your disposal, both those of the publisher, which gives you a sellable opportunity to sell placements in your email newsletters, or on the brand side, they probably have multiple email lists that they're reaching out to different audience segments, and those people have self-selected to be interested in what that brand has to say. Same thing goes for the brand's website and the social channels. Those folks who are there on the website or following them on Facebook are already saying, I want to hear what you have to say. So almost a free resource to be able to put the content out through those channels as well. And there's plenty of other options that don't come right to mind, like thinking about print resources that are available. Print is still the core for so many publishers. And so finding a way to either put a print call to action to go online and view the digital experience, or making a print version, a static version that can live in print to still bring some value right there on the page for your print readers is another great thing to do. And there are other ideas as well. There may be other niche websites and communities that aren't part of the big three of Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and some of the others that come right to mind, but a niche community that is the perfect place for your content about pets or about books or about something else. That could be a great way to reach more consumers. So definitely have a brainstorm and think about where is your audience living and how can you make sure your content is there for them to discover. In the last few years, a lot of publishers have seen on the editorial side that now more than 50% of their traffic is coming from mobile. So a lot of them have tipped the scales and realized they can no longer just create mobile-friendly content. They really have to create their content mobile first. And so I think we're seeing that shift happening on the native side as well, where people are realizing, there's a good possibility that more than half of our audience will be consuming this native ad in a mobile or a tablet environment. So definitely thinking about ways that content can be responsive, no matter the screen size, and thinking about the technical requirements to make sure that this is going to display on Apple and on Android or in different operating systems, in different versions of a browser, all of those things. It's never been more important to make sure your tech team is there and in your corner and on your side, helping to make sure your content works. So, bake some cookies for your tech team and make sure that they're ready to be a part of the team too. We're in a tough environment for media right now where the trend seems to be going towards snackable and quick and social, and everyone wants to know about, viral and how fast can it be read. But the reality is that good content still intrigues us. We still want to read in-depth stories. Books still sell, whether they're in print or digitally. People still pay for a ticket to sit in a 2-hour movie. So it's not that our attention span is gone. It's just that we've shifted the way we apply it. We're very selective about what we're willing to give that much attention. So if you want to capture your audience's attention for more than the average, minute or so that they might spend with an article, you've got to make sure you're bringing something of good enough value that it's worth their 6 minutes or their 10 minutes or their 15 minutes or their hour. So, if you're going for that long form environment, make sure that the stuff you're creating is top notch, because there's plenty of other things your audience can be reading or viewing or looking at any given time. So you don't just have to beat out another article. You've got to beat out Facebook for their attention. You've got to beat out, their music player for their attention. So, the bar has never been higher, but it's certainly possible to have those deep engagements with your audience for long form content. Brands have been telling their own stories for a very long time. It's really not anything new. I think what we're seeing differently is that they've never had more tools to tell those stories, and it's never been easier for them to do it. So we're seeing it much more visibly now. Even when you look at something like the Lego Movie, that's a full-length brand film and it's, you know, a feature-length film, and they're getting us to pay for tickets to their branded content, you know, so it can definitely be done, and it can be done well. I think the marketplace, hopefully, as it does with editorial content, as it does with, you know, other branded content, will keep us honest about, you know, the only things we're willing to engage with for that long of a period of time, or willing to share and praise and share with our friends. It's going to be the good stuff. And so if a brand is going to go all in and create a brand studio and try to create, you know, New York Times quality work or BuzzFeed quality work, or, you know, the quality of work that people are used to seeing from an editorial newsroom, then those brands really have to make sure they keep their best practices in line, and they know what they're creating, and they're doing it with intention and authenticity to make sure that they're delivering something of quality. You know, I think countless brands have a brand blog, right, where they just talk about updates within the company, and it's not the most fascinating reading material. I don't think any of us are, you know, racing to our desktop computers to go read the brand blog. I almost said bland blog, which is appropriate, to go read the brand blog of, you know, the company that manages our 401k. I don't think anyone's rushing to do that. But I think for a lot of creative brands, a lot of beloved brands, you know, the sneakers that you love, or the computer that you use, or the brand of coffee you drink, you have sort of an allegiance to that. And so to learn more about what they're creating, if that content is good, why wouldn't you rush to go read that? So I think those brands who invest and who do it right are going to be able to create much deeper relationships with their audience. I don't know if those kinds of brand content studios will be a threat to publisher content studios. I think what we may see is a bit of a separation in who they serve. Certainly the main appeal of a publisher content studio right now is we can give you that storytelling expertise. We can give you the tools and give you the audience to be able to create and distribute that platform. There may be some brands that don't need that at some point. You know, I don't know that Starbucks necessarily needs a publisher to reach a wide audience. They've got that in many different ways. Same can be said for Red Bull. You know, there are a lot of brands that have their own audience, and if they have the budget, they can hire their own storytellers. But it won't be the vast majority of them, and there will still be plenty of brands that need that expertise and need that guidance to kind of get them to a point where they're creating something that people actually want to engage with. So I think we're safe, but I hope that those brands who are doing it, I hope that they do well. I'm not hoping for them to fail just to protect the idea of a brand content studio, because the important thing is, no matter who your paycheck is coming from, whether it's, you know, the Wall Street Journal or, you know, Lincoln Financial, then, you know, that's going to be an opportunity for a storyteller to tell truly great stories. Then I think we're all still winning.